Look, the government's introduced its bill to ban young Australians from social media, as we know. Independent federal MP Kylie Tink joins us now from Sydney to talk about it. Thanks for joining us on News Breakfast this morning, Kylie.
Morning, Emma.
Look, you've described this proposed ban as a cynical attempt to secure cheap headlines, that it should not be at the top of the government's priority list. But why? What would you say to parents who are getting pretty desperate for help when it comes to this, to get their kids off social media?
Yeah, look, I think the reason I really called this out is because of all the things the government could have prioritised in the last 2 sitting weeks of the year. I just don't see any other reason other than chasing votes for them to have introduced this legislation at this point in time. I'm a parent. I know the struggle that it is to try and help your children be safe in this new digital world, but I think the whole subtlety of this piece of legislation has been lost. Simply saying to our kids, we're going to ban you from accessing these services, is not going to fix the problem. And I think that from my perspective, you know, when we have so much evidence showing the harm that gambling advertising is doing to our nation, and yet the government has done nothing there, and we have no evidence showing that this will work in terms of protecting our kids. And in fact, this very idea has been tried in multiple countries, including in the EU, and it has failed. So it's very hard to not be cynical about this legislation, and I just really wish, I absolutely agree we have to do something in this area, but surely the solution is to introduce legislation that places the onus of care on the platforms themselves to make sure they are providing content that is suitable for our young kids, rather than saying to our young kids, you are banned and you cannot go onto it.
Well, the legislation includes pretty big fines if social media platforms don't enforce these age restrictions. So you think that's not enough? Like, might that change the way social media platforms operate, or you think that something else needs to be done?
Yeah, look, I think actually the fines are irrelevant because there's a couple of things here. Number one, we have no idea how they're going to verify a person's age. And again, as a parent, I have no appetite whatsoever for my children to be uploading their birth certificates or their passports to a social media platform. And number two, the problem with setting an age limit of 16 on these social media sites is that actually it absolves them of all responsibility of the type of content that they put on their platform. So they're not under any obligation to make sure that the content that they're posting will do no harm to our kids. So, you know, it's interesting, Emma, I had a group of children in Parliament House yesterday and this piece of legislation came up. And after a really long conversation with those kids, who ranged in ages from about 12 through to 14, they came up with the suggestion that the age should be brought down to 14 so that it's in line, it should be made law in Australia. At the moment, it's just the platforms that set that. And then their comment was that if the age was 14, the platforms would be forced to ensure that the environment is safe for children to enter. And I think that this is the magic piece of this whole debate that a simple ban to 16 completely misses.
Kylie, speaking of money, which we mentioned there with the fines that social media platforms are facing, I want to move your attention to the Future Fund, because that also came up in Parliament yesterday. It's heavily criticised by some as well, including Peter Costello, who says it risks undermining independence and risks leading to lower returns. The former Future Fund chairman, David Murray, reportedly agrees. Is it worth taking that risk in your mind?
Look, I think, you know what I would say to Australians is just be really ready. We are in the final 2 sitting weeks of this year, and I can pretty much guarantee from this point on it'll either be about the government rushing to finish its homework, so stuff we should have seen months ago being forced through, while on the other hand it'll be all about cheap political point scoring. I come back to the point, I don't think the Future Fund is the biggest issue for our country at the moment. What matters is cost of living. What matters is the fact the government just passed legislation that would see both the major parties receive $5 million in public funding that they can then use to pay the interest on their loans. So I think that in this case, while I understand there's commentary around this space and place and that it is potentially an overstep of the government, I really wish we could get back to focusing on the things that matter most to Australians.
Speaking of the election, we've got these electoral reforms that are being discussed as well. How will this affect you, and have you decided what you're doing next? Because we know your seat is being abolished by the Australian Electoral Commission.
Yeah, look, I think this is a great example of poor legislation legislation, not just bad legislation, but bad legislative process. To be really clear, this is the single biggest change to our democracy in over 40 years. And this legislation was provided to me in draft form on Sunday. It was introduced into the House on Monday, and by Wednesday, it was through the House. There was literally no debate on this bill other than for people like myself. And the more I slept with it and the more I kind of got my head around it, there is no point to this bill other than to stop the independent movement. Why can I say that so confidently? If you're a member of a party, you can spend up to $90 million in an election year to get your people elected. Someone like me will only be able to spend $800,000. It's just not a level playing field.
Kylie, just quickly before you go, this issue about the train dispute in Sydney, you must be relieved that they came to a little agreement before they then go on to these 2 weeks of negotiations, because that would have had a big impact on where you are.
Oh, absolutely. Look, you know, I think, again, it comes back to everyday people just trying to do what they need to do to get on with their lives. And it is a massive relief that we've seen this dispute delayed to the other side of this weekend. I really encourage all parties to get on with it and get this deal finally done so that our community, my community of North Sydney, and also our city can continue to do everything it needs to do to be a really positive contributor to our economy.
Kylie Tenk, thanks very much.